How do you know some of your ancestors weren't royalty? Like, I'm serious, princes, noble families, the children of kings from powerful African kingdoms, because historians have already documented cases where royalty were captured and sold during the slave trade. And once those people were brought to the Americas, the first thing that disappeared was their names, their titles, their families, their histories. So generations later, their descendants would have no idea where they came from. And this wasn't some random accident either. This was the system working exactly as it was designed. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking, like, Ashley, hold on, that might be a stretch, right? But here's the thing. We actually have documented cases of this very thing happening. One of the most famous was a man named Abdurrahman Ibrahim Ibn Sori, and he was literally a prince who ended up enslaved in Mississippi. In 1788, Abdurrahman was 26 years old. He was the son of a ruler in Fouta Djallon, which is now Guinea. He spoke several languages. He had studied in Timbuktu, which at the time was one of the most important intellectual centers in the world. And he commanded an army of about 2,000 soldiers. He wasn't just educated, he was military leadership. He was political leadership. He was the heir to power. And then he was ambushed during a conflict, captured and sold to European traders, and shipped across the Atlantic. He ended up enslaved on a plantation in Mississippi, and he stayed there for 40 years. His enslaver used to call him Prince as a joke because, those were the rumors around the plantation. He didn't think it was serious. He didn't realize that it was true. And Abdurrahman wasn't the only one. In 1716, two princes from the kingdom of Mafumo, in what is now Mozambique, boarded a ship headed to England. They were on a diplomatic mission, but their captain betrayed them. He sold them into slavery in Jamaica. And for 2 years, they kept insisting that they were royals. Nobody believed them, but eventually, a lawyer did. He bought their freedom and tried to take them to London, but a hurricane destroyed the ship. One prince eventually made it back home. The other never did. And those are just the stories we know about. Now, here's something historians have noted, right? In parts of West and Central Africa at the time, warfare between kingdoms was common. And when those kingdoms fought each other, capturing elites could weaken a rival state. Taking princes or noble families could disrupt succession. It could destabilize leadership, right? So when people were captured and pushed into the slave trade system, their identity didn't protect them. The system didn't filter out royalty. It absorbed them, which means that some members of powerful families almost certainly disappeared into the same system that took millions of other Africans. And we actually have written evidence of this happening. In 1526, an African king named Afonso I of Congo wrote a letter directly to the King of Portugal. He was begging him to stop the slave trade, not because of some abstract moral argument either, but because members of his own nobility were disappearing. In the letters, he wrote that traders were kidnapping noblemen and the sons of noblemen and their relatives. And he added something even more disturbing. Some of them were taken at night so they couldn't be recognized. Think about that, a king writing in 1526, explaining that the nobles in his kingdom were being kidnapped and sold. But Portugal never stopped the trade, and eventually the kingdom of Congo was destabilized by it. And this is where the story goes even deeper, because the loss of identity during slavery wasn't accidental. It was intentional. Families were separated, languages were banned, names were replaced. People from different regions were deliberately mixed together. Because a person who knows exactly who they are, who knows their history, who knows their people, they're just harder to control. Millions of Africans had arrived in the Americas and lost record of who they had been. Not because they didn't have identities, but because those identities were taken. So when someone asks you, how do you know your ancestors weren't royalty? The honest answer is, you don't. And that uncertainty is exactly what the system was designed to create. Princes were enslaved. Noble families disappeared. A king wrote letters begging for it to stop. And once people were forced into that system, their titles and names meant nothing anymore. They were just labor, which means the question of who some of your ancestors were before slavery might never have a clear answer. Not because that answer doesn't exist, but because someone made sure that it would be almost impossible to recover. And that might be one of the greatest thefts in history.